Welcome back, everyone, to Creepy Secrets. In tonight's episode, we're diving into 10 of the most disturbing true cemetery horror stories. These aren't just ghost tales whispered at night. These are chilling encounters from people who stepped into graveyards and came back with memories they'll never forget. From shadowy figures moving between headstones to voices calling out from the dark, these stories will make you think twice before visiting a cemetery after sundown. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Creepy Secrets, hit that like button, and share this video with your friends. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks for joining us. Now let's get started. I never should have gone to the cemetery that day. I told myself it was simple, a quick visit to my grandfather's grave to leave flowers and say a few words. But the second I parked my car at the edge of the lot, a cold wind sliced through the trees, carrying a smell I couldn't place. It was metallic, like rusted iron mixed with damp soil, and it made my stomach turn. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the cracked headstones, and the place felt unnaturally quiet, like the world outside had vanished. I gripped the bouquet of daisies tighter, telling myself I was overreacting. Cemeteries are always eerie, but this felt different. I could feel eyes on me the moment I stepped onto the gravel path. The grave was easy to find. My grandfather had been a small-town legend in our area, and his plot was near the edge of the oldest section of the cemetery. The grass was overgrown here, brushing against my knees, and the headstones leaned at odd angles. I knelt beside his, arranging the flowers when I first noticed it, a movement in the corner of my vision. I whipped around, expecting to see a deer or maybe a stray dog, but nothing was there. Only the trees swaying gently, the wind whispering through the branches. I shrugged it off, blaming nerves, and turned back to the grave. As I placed the flowers, I heard a soft crunch behind me, like footsteps on gravel. My head snapped up, heart hammering, but there was still no one. Just the empty rows of tombstones and the wind rattling a nearby iron fence. I muttered to myself, trying to sound casual, but I could feel a prickle at the back of my neck. Something wasn't right. I finished the flowers and stood, brushing dirt from my jeans. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were faint, almost blending into the gravel, but unmistakable. 2 sets following me from the far end of the row. I froze. The cemetery had been empty when I arrived. I'd walked straight from the car to the grave, yet here were footprints, tracking me as if someone had been watching the entire time. I turned quickly, scanning the area. Nothing, no one. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I forced myself to breathe slowly, telling myself it was probably another visitor I hadn't seen, someone leaving the older section before I arrived. But when I glanced toward the entrance, the path was empty. I got the distinct sense I was being watched. I shook my head and hurried back to my car, my steps quickening. That's when I first heard it, soft, barely audible, a whisper carried on the wind. I stopped dead in my tracks. My name, clear as day. Alex. I spun around, nothing. Just trees and gravestones, swaying. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was my imagination. I had been here alone all morning. I got in my car and locked the doors, hands shaking as I started the engine. The gravel crunched under the tires, and for a moment I thought I was safe. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror, something made my blood run cold. A shadow, darker than the surrounding trees, lingered at the edge of the cemetery. Not a person, not entirely, but a shape. Still, watching. I drove off slowly, glancing back. It didn't move, didn't vanish. Just remained at the boundary of the graveyard. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow from a leaning headstone. But I knew deep down it wasn't. The rest of the drive home was tense. Every bump in the road, every sway of the trees in the dark, felt amplified. When I finally got inside my apartment, I locked every door and window, telling myself the cemetery was behind me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining the shadow from the rearview mirror, growing closer, circling the edges of my consciousness. I tried turning on all the lights, but the room still felt cold and shadows pooled unnaturally in the corners. That metallic, earthy smell from the cemetery lingered faintly, even indoors. My rational mind told me it was stress, that the mountain air and overgrown graves had gotten to me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. The next day, I noticed things. Small things at first. My front door, locked the night before, was slightly ajar. I live alone. My shoes, which I had neatly placed by the door, were slightly moved. I told myself it was absent-mindedness. But then I found muddy footprints, just one set. leading from the hallway toward the living room. They looked like the gravel from the cemetery. My pulse spiked. I called the police, but they suggested it was probably me sleepwalking or imagining things. They left without inspecting further. I didn't argue. I didn't want them seeing what I saw. I didn't want anyone in my apartment, if whatever had followed me was still outside, lurking. Days passed and the presence worsened. I could feel it in my apartment, a weight in the air. Lights flickered, shadows shifted even when there was nothing to cast them. I heard whispers at night, indistinct but unmistakable, echoing in my ears as if someone were speaking from inside the walls. Sometimes it was just one voice, a low rasp, repeating my name. Sometimes multiple voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus. I tried leaving, but every trip outside felt like I was being hunted, eyes on me from every angle. The city, normally bustling and protective in its noise, felt empty, as if the shadow had followed me, masking the people around me, bending the space itself. One night, I woke to the metallic smell again, stronger this time, filling my bedroom. I bolted upright and saw it, a figure, darker than the night, standing in the corner. Its outline was vaguely human, but distorted like a shadow with form. I froze, unable to scream. It tilted its head toward me, and the whispers rose into a chorus, repeating over and over. "You shouldn't have left. You shouldn't have left. You shouldn't have left." The air grew colder, and I felt my breath frosting in front of my face. I ran out of the room, into the kitchen, but it followed, flowing across the floor like liquid darkness, silent except for the whispers. I grabbed a knife, anything to feel safe, but the moment I swung, my arm passed through empty air. It wasn't tangible, and I realized it didn't need to be. It was inside me now, in my mind, in my awareness. I wasn't alone. I left my apartment the next morning, bags packed, and drove straight to my grandfather's grave. Maybe if I returned, it would stop following me. Maybe I could apologize, explain that I hadn't meant to disturb anything. But when I arrived, the cemetery was empty, eerily quiet. No shadows, no figures, just the wind rustling through the branches and the familiar smell of damp earth and iron. I knelt beside my grandfather's grave again, whispering apologies, telling the shadow that I meant no harm. I stayed for hours, but nothing appeared. I convinced myself it was gone, that my fear had been paranoia, stress, grief. That night, I slept for the first time in days, finally feeling some relief. But the relief didn't last. Over the following week, the small signs returned. The metallic smell in my apartment, shadows shifting at the edge of my vision, whispers at night. One night, I woke to see muddy footprints leading from the hallway to my bed. I screamed and jumped up, but the footprints were gone. Only the faint echo of whispers remained. I tried moving to a friend's house, but the same signs appeared there, as if it followed me no matter where I went. The police were no longer helpful, attributing everything to stress or hallucinations. Friends began avoiding me when I described what was happening, calling me paranoid, unstable. I was alone. Weeks turned into months. I stopped leaving my apartment except for necessities, avoiding eye contact with anyone on the street, avoiding the parks, cemeteries, and forests that reminded me of where it all began. I tried cleansing rituals, sage, even counseling, but nothing worked. The shadow, the whispers, the cold metallic smell, they were always there, just at the edge of perception. Sometimes I swear I see the outline of a figure outside my window, in the alley, or in the darkened hallway. Sometimes I hear a low rasping whisper when I enter a room. Always my name. Always the same chilling undertone. You can never escape. I've learned to live with it. Or at least I try. I leave lights on, keep the doors locked, never go near the cemetery again. But I know it's still following, always close, patient, waiting. It doesn't need to appear for me to feel its presence. I can feel it in my chest when I wake in the middle of the night. I can feel it in my mind when I close my eyes. It doesn't need to speak to terrify me. The memory of its whispers is enough. I can never forget that cold, metallic smell, the way the air itself seems to press against me, the feeling of being watched from shadows that don't belong to anything visible. The last time I saw my grandfather's grave, I swore the soil looked freshly turned, as if someone or something had been there after I left. I don't know if it was the shadow, some lingering part of whatever it is, or if my mind is finally breaking. I can't go back to check. And the worst part is, I know I'll never be alone again. I live with that certainty now. The presence just at the edge of awareness, never showing, but always reminding me I was followed, and it never stopped. Even now, typing this, I feel it. The cold brush of the air behind me, the faint metallic scent, the whisper, soft, low, unmistakable, Alex. And I know with perfect clarity, it's still here. I had been driving through the back roads of Pine Hollow, a small Appalachian town that felt like it hadn't changed since the 50s, when I first noticed the cemetery. I was lost, my phone dead, and the fog had started to roll in low and thick, smothering the headlights and making the road edges vanish into gray. The cemetery appeared suddenly, a black stain against the hills, iron gates twisted and rusty, leaning as if they were alive and breathing. A man stood at the entrance, hunched over his rake. He looked old, but not just old, like someone who had been living there for a century. His eyes were sharp, almost feral, and he waved me over. I was hesitant, but I needed directions, and he seemed the only person for miles. "Don't go near the old mausoleum," he said before I even asked a question. His voice was low, dry, like the whisper of dead leaves. I blinked, confused. "It's not safe. Not for anyone. Not ever." I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss the chill crawling up my spine. A cemetery, I thought nothing alive could hurt me here. But there was something in the way he said it, like he'd seen too much, or like the stones themselves were listening. I asked about it, trying to sound casual, and he just shook his head. "You'll see for yourself if you're stupid enough." Then he turned and raked again, silence falling over the graves. The fog was so thick I could barely make out the rows of tombstones. I wandered between them, boots crunching over the frost-damp grass, the smell of earth and decay thick in my nose. The cemetery was enormous, stretching back into the hills where trees pressed against the edges like a wall. I passed small family plots, old marble markers blackened with moss, some leaning at impossible angles. Each one whispered of lives long gone, of names fading, dates worn smooth by wind and rain. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud. It was the kind of quiet that presses in on your ears, and every small sound, a crow's caw, a snapping branch, made me jump. That's when I saw it, the mausoleum. Even through the fog, it was impossible to miss. It was huge, more like a small building than a grave. Black stone, vines crawling over the corners, the door barely hanging on rusted hinges. It felt wrong, like it didn't belong in the cemetery. My stomach dropped as a cold wind blew from its open archway, carrying a smell I couldn't place. Metallic, musty, and rotten all at once. Something in me screamed to turn around to go back to the safety of the road, but curiosity is a cruel thing. I wanted to know why the old man had warned me. I approached slowly, the air growing colder with each step. Shadows pooled in the corners of the doorway like spilled ink. The floor inside was thick with dust, undisturbed for years, and the faint outline of steps led downward into darkness. I shined my phone's flashlight, though it barely cut through the gloom. Carvings lined the walls, names, dates, symbols I didn't recognize, scratches that seemed too deliberate to be natural. My pulse quickened. Something about the place felt alive, or at least aware, like it could watch me and react. I kept telling myself it was my imagination. It had to be. I stepped inside. The air was heavier here, humid and stagnant, carrying that same metallic rot smell. The light from outside barely reached the walls, and shadows twisted where they shouldn't. My footsteps echoed off stone in odd patterns, and every sound seemed amplified, as if the mausoleum itself were listening. I started down the stairs, and that's when I noticed the markings on the steps. Tiny scratches, almost like fingernails dragged across the stone, but old, ancient. My stomach sank. Someone or something had been here before me. The rational part of my brain tried to reason it away, maybe a caretaker from decades ago, but the hair on my neck stood up, and I could feel the cold pressing in around me. Halfway down, my flashlight flickered. The beam danced across the walls, catching what looked like shapes in the corners, shapes that weren't shadows. They moved just slightly when I wasn't looking, subtle, like breathing. I froze. The old man's warning echoed in my mind, clear and terrifying. Not safe. Not for anyone, not ever. My heartbeat thudded so loud I could hear it in my ears. I considered turning back, but the stairs had shifted. The way the shadows pooled made it feel like the exit had moved. It was disorienting, like being underwater. Then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost beneath the hum of my own fear. I thought it was the wind until it came again, sharper, clearer. Leave. I froze, staring into the darkness, trying to find its source. The whisper seemed to circle me, moving along the walls behind me, over my head. My legs shook, but I took another step. The air grew colder, so cold it burned my lungs. A wet, slick feeling pressed against my skin, like the walls themselves were exhaling moisture. I shined my light across the floor, and that's when I saw the footprints. Small, bare, impossibly pale, leading deeper into the darkness. I knew they weren't human. They couldn't be. The prints were too perfect. No smudges, no errors. And they weren't alone. They came with tiny scratches along the stone, small streaks of what looked like blood. They stopped suddenly just a few feet ahead, at a blackened doorway I hadn't noticed before. A chill ran through me that wasn't from the air. It was fear, pure and primal. My hand shook as I reached out to the door. The whispers grew louder, almost urgent now, like multiple voices layering over each other. I could make out words, names, commands, warnings. But everything else was a jumble of static and breath. Something shifted behind me. I spun around, heart in my throat, and the stairs I had come down seemed wrong, twisted, longer, deeper, like the architecture had changed while I wasn't looking. My flashlight flickered again, dying for a moment before flickering back on. And then I saw it. A figure, hunched and pale, standing at the edge of my light. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, just enough to pierce me. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and insistent. The whispers became screaming in my head, overlapping and urgent. Go. Go now. I turned and ran, feet pounding the stone stairs, not caring if I tripped. The echoes followed me, mocking, laughing, twisting. I stumbled into the main hall, gasping for air, and saw the door to the outside, finally. I bolted through it, into the foggy cemetery, lungs burning, heart hammering. I didn't look back. The mausoleum loomed behind me, impossible and oppressive like a wound in the earth. The old caretaker was gone when I stumbled back to the gate. I called out, expecting him to scold me or ask what I'd seen, but the cemetery was silent. Only the wind moved, carrying the faint metallic smell that still clung to my clothes. I got back into my car and drove. Fog thick around me, hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. The road led me back to the town, familiar houses and lampposts guiding me. But I could still feel it, the weight of the mausoleum, watching, waiting. I told people about it later, but no one believed me. A few old-timers murmured about the cemetery, about the old mausoleum, about people who had disappeared over the decades, never found, their graves empty. They told me to leave it alone, to forget it. But I can't. Sometimes at night, I dream of those stairs, the whispers, the pale figure at the edge of my flashlight. I wake sweating, heart hammering, and for a moment, I think I'm back there, staring into the blackness, trapped. And the worst part, I never actually saw Tyler or anyone else inside. Only the signs they left behind, footprints, scratches, a lingering smell that clings even when I shower. Something in that mausoleum knows I was there. Something knows I saw it. And sometimes when I pass a cemetery on a foggy night, I swear I can see the doorway open just a crack and feel a faint exhale on the back of my neck and hear the whispers again, soft and insistent. Come back. I'll never go near that place again. But the old caretaker's warning is alive in my mind every day. The mausoleum is not safe. Not for anyone, not ever. And I can't shake the feeling that one day it will come looking for me, patient and silent, and I won't have the choice to leave. I stayed later than I should have that night, wandering the cemetery alone, the orange glow of my flashlight bouncing across moss-covered tombstones. I'd been photographing old graves for a personal project, mainly the ornate carvings and weathered epitaphs that people usually ignore. I love capturing history and decay, but that night, the shadows felt different, heavier, watching. I had been alone in this section of the cemetery before, plenty of times, but tonight there was a tightness in the air that made my chest feel squeezed. The wind wasn't strong, just enough to rustle the leaves, but it carried a whisper that made me freeze mid-step. I thought it was my imagination at first. I told myself it was just the trees, but then I heard it again, my name. Soft, deliberate, barely more than a breath. James? I spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness, but the rows of stones stretched back endlessly, familiar yet distorted in the dim light. I called out, trying to sound casual like I wasn't alone, but my voice sounded tinny and strange against the cold air. Silence answered. My heartbeat pounded so loud in my ears I was almost certain anyone nearby could hear it. I shook my head and tried to laugh it off, blaming shadows and nerves. Yet something about the way the wind shifted made it clear. I wasn't alone. I moved deeper into the cemetery, toward a section I hadn't explored much. The stones here were older, leaning at odd angles, cracked and eroded. Moss and lichen ate the inscriptions. My flashlight caught on something unusual. One tombstone had fresh footprints leading up to it. Wet mud clinging to the grass in patterns that didn't match mine. My pulse spiked. I wasn't expecting anyone else here, not at this hour. Whoever it was had to be standing just beyond the reach of the light. I told myself it was probably a caretaker finishing late, though the night shift didn't usually roam this far. Still, my gut twisted. Something was off. I crouched to frame a shot of a particularly ornate headstone, and my camera clicked softly. That's when I felt it. A chill brushing against the back of my neck, a coldness not from the night, but from something alive. I swiveled, flashlight sweeping the rows, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw a figure crouched behind a stone, too dark to make out properly. I blinked and it was gone. My breath caught. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the shadows, a warped tree root, or my own exhaustion. But the whisper came again, closer this time, almost right in my ear. James. I froze, every hair on my body standing straight. My camera swung down and I stared at the empty ground. Nothing moved. No one should be there. Yet my instinct screamed that something was. I backed up slowly, the mud sucking at my boots, my flashlight illuminating more stones, more faces etched into stone. Names long forgotten, dates that went back centuries. And then I noticed it. One stone wasn't old. Not at all. It was new, polished, sharp edges glinting faintly under my light. The name carved into it was the same as mine. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, the camera swinging wildly. My rational mind screamed that it had to be a coincidence, that someone else had the same name, but the placement of the stone didn't make sense. It was in the very center of the plot, a place where the earth had only recently been disturbed. I bent closer, the faint smell of freshly turned dirt hitting me, and I noticed the small details. Tiny scratches at the base, almost like someone had been digging by hand, and faint footprints disappearing into the shadows behind it. That's when the whispering started. Multiple voices now, faint, overlapping. James, James, come closer. The words weren't angry or threatening, not yet, but they were insistent, seductive in a way that made my stomach twist with fear. I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen, the cold gripping my bones like ice. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and in that instant, I thought I saw dozens of figures standing around me, not solid, just shadows, heads tilted, silently staring. I stumbled back toward the edge of the cemetery, trying to keep the new headstone in sight, but it felt like the layout of the graves was shifting. Paths I had walked just moments ago seemed gone. Stones I recognized were in different places, and the shadows between them were deeper, darker, almost moving. I realized then that this was no ordinary cemetery night. Something about staying late, being alone, had stirred it. I tried to call someone on my phone, but there was no signal. Not even a single bar. The whispering rose again, layered, urgent. James. Don't leave. Stay. I broke into a run, stumbling over roots and uneven ground, crashing into headstones, and the whispers followed, fading and rising with every step. I could hear soft dragging behind me, like someone or something was walking without shoes on the damp earth. I didn't dare look back. At some point, I reached the older section of the cemetery, where stones were cracked and barely legible. The air here felt heavier, thicker, almost pressing down on my lungs. And then I saw it again, the new headstone. I couldn't understand how. I had run straight, but it was right there, perfectly placed, as if waiting. The whispers had grown louder, now layered over each other, a chorus. James. Come closer. My head spun. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt tight, my mouth dry. My hand shook as I raised my flashlight, and I swear I saw fingers, pale and thin, reaching out from behind the stone. I dropped the camera. It smashed against a gravestone with a harsh crack, and I stumbled back. The shadows around the stone seemed to ripple, almost breathing. The whispers turned into something else, a low moaning, sorrowful, but full of intent. circling me, following me, tugging at my mind. I grabbed the camera and ran blindly, feet slipping in mud, branches scraping my face, the cemetery stretching endlessly ahead. Then I tripped and fell into a small depression, my flashlight spinning, beam catching on dozens of tiny mounds I hadn't noticed before. Fresh graves, too small to be adult. I scrambled back, stomach churning, the whispers now surrounding me completely. And then, a voice clear and chilling. "James, you're here." I bolted upright, running faster than I thought I could. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, and I finally saw the fence marking the edge of the cemetery. Relief surged briefly, but as I neared it, I saw movement along the outer row of stones. Figures, faint but unmistakable, watching me leave. Their heads tilted in the same unnatural way, shadows stretching impossibly long in the weak moonlight. I didn't stop until I reached my car, chest heaving, hands slippery on the door handle. I locked myself in, leaving the camera, flashlight, and everything else behind. The whispers didn't follow, not beyond the fence, but I could still feel them, cold tendrils brushing against my mind as I started the engine. My hands shook so badly I almost crashed getting out of the parking lot. I didn't sleep that night or the next. I kept the memory vivid in my mind, replaying it, trying to convince myself it was stress, imagination, exhaustion. But the photographs I took that evening told another story. Most were black, just fuzzy outlines, but in one, barely visible through motion blur, I saw them. Dozens of pale figures crouched, staring directly at me from behind headstones. And the final shot, taken just before I dropped the camera, showed the new headstone with my name, perfectly centered, fresh dirt around it, and a shadow in the shape of a hand resting on the ground in front of it. I told a friend what happened, hesitated on the specifics, but they brushed it off, saying maybe I just freaked myself out. I wanted to believe that. But the next week I drove past the cemetery again. From the main road in the dim evening light, I saw it, the new headstone, gleaming slightly, perfectly positioned, and something, or someone, standing behind it, just watching. I didn't stop. I couldn't even now. Weeks later, I still hear it sometimes. My name, carried on the wind through the trees, faint but unmistakable. A soft whisper when I'm alone at home, a tug at the edge of my thoughts. I can't tell if it's real or if I'm imagining it, but deep down, I know the cemetery isn't done with me. That new grave isn't just a coincidence. They know my name. They know where I am. And I know, if I go back, even just to retrieve my camera, I won't leave. I've stopped photographing graves at night. I've stopped going near that section of town entirely. But I can't stop thinking about it. The way the shadows moved, the whispers calling me closer. The new grave, freshly dug with my name carved in sharp, perfect letters. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. Every time the wind stirs, I hear it. And I know somehow that it's waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to stay. Some nights, I swear I hear my name again, softly, just behind my window on the wind. And I know that one day, if I don't stay careful, I'll hear it for the last time. I shouldn't have stayed after dark, but curiosity and stubbornness got the better of me. The cemetery had been empty all day, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than silence itself, the kind that presses against your chest and makes your skin crawl. I was there alone, wandering the narrow dirt paths between crooked headstones that leaned like tired old men. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, leaving only the gray wash of twilight and the flickering orange of my flashlight. That's when I noticed it, a movement between two graves on the far side of the cemetery. At first I thought it was a trick of the shadows, my eyes adjusting to the dim light, but the shape shifted. Something, or someone, was moving. My heart kicked, thudding so hard I thought it might echo across the stones. I froze, telling myself it had to be an animal. Deer, raccoon, maybe even a stray dog. The thing stopped moving, and I forced myself to take a slow step forward. The cold air smelled of damp soil, rotting leaves, and something metallic that made my stomach twist. The moonlight reflected off what looked like pale skin crouched low, almost crawling across the ground. I blinked, certain I was seeing things, but when I looked again, it had disappeared. I kept my flashlight sweeping, the beam jittering as my hands shook. The cemetery was full of noise now, the scraping of branches in the wind, the occasional rustle of leaves, a faint creak like a wooden gate swinging somewhere far off. Nothing should have been moving except me. and yet I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. I convinced myself to keep walking toward where I'd seen the movement, each step heavier than the last, the gravel crunching under my boots like a countdown. That's when I heard it, a low, dragging sound. Something scraping across the dirt, slow and deliberate. I froze, gripping the flashlight tighter, swinging the beam across the graves. Between two stones, I caught it, a hunched shape, too thin to be human, sliding along the ground, limbs bent at strange angles. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear metallic in my mouth. It moved again, just a few feet, then stopped, like it was waiting. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt frozen, rooted to the gravel. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure didn't look alive in any normal way. Its skin seemed pale, almost gray, and its hair hung in long, wet clumps that stuck to its face. I could make out the glint of eyes catching my flashlight, wide and unblinking. Something in me knew that looking directly at it would be a mistake, yet I couldn't look away. The air grew colder, like the warmth had been sucked out of the world, leaving me shivering despite my jacket. I backed up slowly, hoping it wouldn't notice me moving. The thing didn't move for a moment, then it began sliding again, closer this time. The dragging sound echoed against the tombstones, unnatural and heavy. I cursed under my breath, fumbling with my phone to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. Panic set in, the kind of panic that makes your chest burn and your hands tremble so badly you can barely hold anything. Suddenly, it darted behind a taller monument, vanishing for a heartbeat, and when it reappeared, it was on the opposite side of the path, closer than before. My breathing came in ragged gasps. The figure tilted its head unnaturally, its eyes fixed on me, and I realized it was smiling. Its mouth stretched too wide, wet and thin-lipped, teeth glinting in the flashlight's beam. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a gravestone. Every instinct screamed to run, and I did, my boots pounding against the hard-packed earth, the flashlight bouncing wildly, illuminating the shapes of the graves as I bolted. I reached the edge of the cemetery where the fence was rusted and broken, and I jumped over it without thinking. The gravel cut my palms, my knees scraped, and I didn't care. I ran to the road, not looking back, only realizing the full weight of fear as my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. My car was a small speck of safety in the distance, and I never ran so fast in my life. When I finally reached it, I jumped in, locked the doors, and leaned against the steering wheel, shaking so hard I could barely hold the keys. I tried to convince myself it was over, that I had just seen a weird vagrant or a trick of the shadows. But the memory of those eyes, unblinking and glinting, kept me awake for hours, staring out at the cemetery from the safety of my car. The dragging sound, the smile, it stayed in my mind, echoing long after I had left. I didn't go back that night, and I didn't sleep well even after I made it home. The next day, I drove back cautiously, in daylight, telling myself I just wanted to see if anything had been left behind. The cemetery was empty, silent in the way mountains can be quiet in the morning. The ground was undisturbed, no footprints, no signs of anything having been there except for a few broken twigs. I laughed nervously at myself, the sound harsh and hollow in my own ears. Maybe it had been a raccoon. Maybe my mind had been playing tricks. That's what I told myself. But when I reached the graves where I thought I had seen the figure, something stopped me cold. A small stone had been knocked over, lying flat on the ground, and I could swear I saw a long smear of something dark across it, dirt mixed with something else. My stomach churned. I knelt down carefully, brushing the dirt away with my fingers. It looked like dried blood. I froze, the metallic smell hitting me suddenly, sharp and undeniable. My phone vibrated in my pocket, though I had no messages. I jumped up, the hairs on my neck standing straight, and for a moment I swore I saw movement at the edge of the trees again. I left immediately, driving faster than I should have, heart hammering in my chest. But over the next few days I couldn't shake it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure sliding between the graves. I could hear the scraping, the wet, impossible smile, feel those eyes on me. Friends tried to calm me, said I was overreacting, that it was just a nightmare, but I knew what I had seen. Weeks later I got braver, or maybe foolish, and returned again. The cemetery was empty. The graves were untouched, no sign of the figure, nothing to suggest it had ever been there. I walked carefully between the rows, shining my flashlight, calling out. Nothing. And just when I started to convince myself that I had imagined everything, I saw it, a small fresh mound of dirt just off the path. Not a grave, not marked, just a mound, as if someone, or something, had recently lain there. My stomach dropped. I crouched down, feeling the damp soil with my hands. It was soft, warm, and breathing. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking, and the mound shifted. Something rose slowly, its form thin, elongated, wet hair hanging in clumps. The mouth stretched into that same impossible smile. The eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, alive in a way that made my blood run cold. I turned and ran, faster than I had ever run, not daring to look back. I tripped, fell, and scraped my hands and knees on the gravel, but I didn't stop. The scraping sound followed me to the edge of the cemetery, echoing as I leapt into my car and locked the doors. I haven't returned since. I don't know what it was, or why it was there, or how it moved so silently between the graves. Friends tell me it was an animal, a trick of the light, my imagination. Maybe they're right, but I can still hear it at night. A faint dragging, a whisper of movement, the hint of a smile in the darkness. When I close my eyes, I see it sliding between the graves, coming closer, closer, closer. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I swear I can feel it watching me from the corner, waiting, always waiting. I remember the first time I saw it. I had gone to visit my brother's grave late at night like I often did. It wasn't something I advertised or even talked about. I just needed to see him, to sit there and feel close to him even though he'd been gone for over a year. The cemetery was empty, the fog thick between the gravestones, and the cold had seeped into my bones before I even got out of the car. I parked on the gravel path and pulled my jacket tighter around me. The air smelled damp, like mud mixed with decaying leaves, and the smell made my stomach churn. That's when I noticed the shadow. It was sitting on my brother's tombstone, hunched over, still, like it had been there for hours. At first, I thought it was someone playing a prank. Maybe another visitor, maybe a caretaker. But there were no lights, no cars, no sounds of life. Only the wind moving through the dead trees and the soft rustle of leaves. I called out his name, thinking it might be someone who knew me. The shadow didn't move. The air grew colder, sharp against my skin, and my breath came out in visible puffs. I stepped closer, my boots crunching over gravel, heart hammering. That's when I realized the shadow wasn't quite human. Its head tilted at a strange angle, unnatural, and its body seemed to blend with the darkness, like it was absorbing the night itself. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't look away. There was something familiar about it, too. Something wrong that triggered the memory of my brother's last hospital visit. I'd seen him pale, wasted, shadows under his eyes so deep they seemed carved into his face. The shape on the tombstone twisted in ways no human could, yet I felt certain it was aware of me, watching me, waiting. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears over the wind. The sound of dead branches snapping under the weight of the fog-covered trees made me flinch, but the shadow didn't react. I started to back away slowly, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My flashlight sat in the car, and the street lamps on the far end of the cemetery didn't reach this deep into the rows of graves. The shadow remained perfectly still, and the fog seemed to cling to it, curling around its form like tendrils. I whispered my brother's name again, quieter this time, almost begging it to respond. That's when it moved, but not like a person. It slid or perhaps was pulled across the stone so smoothly it didn't make a sound. My stomach dropped. It wasn't moving toward me, it was moving like it was rooted to the tombstone, and still I felt the gaze of it. I ran then. Not full speed because the cold made my legs stiff, but fast enough that I stumbled over roots and loose soil. I didn't look back until I was at the car, chest heaving, hands trembling. The shadow was gone. The tombstone was empty. I slammed the door, locked it, and sat there shaking for what felt like hours. The fog swallowed the cemetery whole, and in that silence I thought I was safe. I was wrong. Over the next few nights I kept going back, drawn to it, compelled. Each time it was there, sometimes crouched, sometimes stretched out along the tombstone, always silent. The wind would shift and I'd catch glimpses of it moving between other graves, but whenever I tried to focus, it blended into the darkness. I began noticing small things. My car would have leaves on it that weren't there before. Footprints appeared in the wet ground near the headstone, shallow, oddly shaped, like human feet, but too long and narrow. Once I thought I saw a handprint pressed into the dirt beside my brother's tombstone, and I could have sworn the soil looked scorched, blackened around the edges. I tried talking to people about it. My parents, a friend from work. No one believed me. They suggested grief, exhaustion, imagining things in the fog, maybe even nightmares bleeding into waking life. But I wasn't dreaming. I could feel the presence of it, the way it occupied the space in front of the tombstone. I felt it breathing. The air would thicken around me, heavy, damp, smelling like wet earth and something else, something metallic. It would sit there until I left, until the lights of the car were on, then vanish like it had never been there. One night I brought a camera. I set it on a tripod at the edge of the grave, thinking at least I could capture something tangible. I left it recording and sat on the grass a few feet away, trying not to breathe too loudly. Around midnight, the shadow appeared. My stomach twisted as it seemed to lift slightly off the stone, drifting, the fog swirling around it unnaturally. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The air smelled of iron. I could hear faint whispers, like my brother's voice, broken, calling out to me. I don't know if it was real or just my mind, but it made my teeth ache. The shadow didn't move toward me, but I felt it pressing against me, against my chest, as if the space itself had weight. I reviewed the footage later. The camera picked up nothing but static and the faintest ripple of mist. No shadow, no movement, just the tombstone, empty, the fog swirling in the wind. I wanted to throw the camera, smash it, anything to make the sensation go away. But the feeling remained, the cold pressing against my skin, even when I was home in my warm apartment. I couldn't shake it. I could feel eyes on me when I closed my eyes in the quiet moments before sleep. I tried not to go back to the cemetery, but the pull was too strong. One evening, I got there just as twilight was fading. The fog hadn't yet rolled in, and I could see the shadow from a distance, hunched and still. But something was wrong. It wasn't on the tombstone this time. It was sitting on the ground, eyes, or where I imagined eyes should be, fixed on me. I felt my knees weaken. I stepped closer, trying to understand why it was off the stone, why it was waiting. And then I saw it, the shape of my brother, but not right. The proportions were slightly off. Too long in the limbs, the head tilted at a wrong angle. The clothes were tattered but familiar. I stumbled back. The air was thick, pungent with the smell of wet dirt and iron again, and I could hear soft scratching, like fingernails over stone. I realized then that it wasn't waiting for me to leave. It was waiting for something else. I don't know what. I tried to run, but my legs refused to move. My hands went to my ears, to block out the whispers, the soft scraping, but the sounds were inside my head now, echoing, twisting my thoughts. I fell to the ground, face pressed into the wet grass, and the shadow moved closer. The fog rolled in fast then, and I couldn't see anything. I couldn't breathe. And then it was on the tombstone again, sitting perfectly still, watching me, as if it had never moved at all. I scrambled to my car, heart pounding, sweat freezing on my skin. I left the cemetery that night and didn't look back until the next day. But even in the daylight, when I could see the rows of stones and the empty paths, I could feel it. The way it waits, the way it watches. I think it knows I see it. I think it knows I fear it. I haven't gone back in weeks. I've tried to stay away, but the pull is always there, gnawing at me, telling me to go back, to sit with it, to look closer. I dream about it too. I wake up with that smell in my nose, that cold pressing against my skin, the whisper of my brother's name barely audible, but sharp enough to wake me in terror. I keep telling myself it's grief, that my mind is playing tricks, but every instinct tells me it's more than that. Every instinct tells me that shadow is real and that it's waiting for me at the grave, sitting on my brother's tombstone, patient, silent, watching, ready to follow me home if I let it, and I don't know if I can ever leave it behind. I never believed in the stories people told about Old Hollow Cemetery, the kind you hear when you're a kid and never really forget. Even as an adult, I thought the warnings were just superstition, a mix of boredom and local legend. But that night changed everything. I was there alone, on a dare from a friend who insisted I wouldn't last an hour by myself. It was late October, and the cemetery was shrouded in fog that clung to the gravestones like a living thing. The smell of damp earth was strong, sharp in the cool air, mixing with the faint metallic tang of old rusted iron from fences long forgotten. My flashlight cut a thin line through the mist, but it barely reached the moss-covered stones ahead. I had a bad feeling the moment I stepped past the wrought iron gate. The gate itself groaned under the weight of neglect, swinging slightly as though warning me to leave, but I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. The crypt was near the back of the cemetery, tucked between two crumbling mausoleums that leaned toward each other like old friends sharing secrets. Its stone surface was blackened with age, the engravings barely visible, worn smooth by decades of wind and rain. I had seen it from the road 100 times, always locked tight, always silent. Tonight I thought it looked different. I told myself I was imagining things, that the shadows were playing tricks. I stepped closer. The door was heavy, wrought iron with intricate patterns that looked almost like claws reaching out. And the lock, old, rusted, almost fused to the metal itself, wasn't just old. It was ancient. It felt like it had been guarding something for centuries. My flashlight flickered as I crouched to examine it. That's when I heard it. A faint click, like the settling of old bones, and the lock turned itself. Slowly, smoothly. My stomach dropped. I froze, convinced I had moved something with my own weight, that my eyes were playing tricks. But the crypt door creaked open in a way that no wind or gravity could have done, swinging inward just enough to swallow the light. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot as a cold draft brushed past me, smelling of damp stone and something older, fouler, like decay but alive. I tried to convince myself it was mechanical, that the centuries of wear had made the lock weak, but the truth was obvious. No one else was there. The cemetery was silent except for the low rustle of dead leaves across cracked stones. I held my flashlight over my shoulder and took a cautious step forward. The door groaned again, pushing itself wider, inviting or daring me to enter. My heart was hammering, every nerve screaming at me to turn around. But curiosity, that foolish human curiosity, kept me moving. The floor inside was stone, slick with moisture, and the air smelled like cold metal. I could see faint shapes in the darkness, carved pillars and niches, shadows where coffins should be. My flashlight's beam landed on a coffin near the center, its lid carved with intricate symbols that didn't look like any language I knew. The metal handles glinted wetly, though it hadn't rained. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and took another step. The door slammed shut behind me with a thunderous finality that made me jump so hard I nearly dropped my flashlight. The lock clicked again, this time from the inside. I couldn't understand how it could do that. I couldn't understand anything anymore. I scanned the crypt. The walls were lined with more coffins, old and newer ones alike. Some had names etched, dates from centuries ago, others were blank. The air was colder than anything outside, and I could see my breath cloud in front of me. Then I noticed it, a faint movement near the far wall, just a twitch, like someone shifting under a coffin lid. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, told myself I was exhausted, that my imagination was running wild. But the movement came again, and then I saw something else. The faintest glimmer of light, not from my flashlight, but from inside one of the coffins. I froze completely. It was subtle, just a pulse of yellow light, rhythmic, like breathing. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, but my feet felt rooted to the cold stone floor. The pulse grew slightly stronger, and then the coffin lid moved. Slowly, unevenly, as if whatever was inside had never expected to be disturbed, but was now responding. My flashlight flickered again, and I had the sudden, horrifying realization that the light wasn't my imagination. The lid was rising inch by inch, metal creaking as if straining under a living weight. My mind screamed at me to leave, to get out, to run into the fog and never look back. I couldn't move, and then I saw it. The face, or something like a face. Pale, drawn tight over hollow eyes, with a mouth that opened just wide enough to let out a rasping breath that smelled of rot and wet earth. The eyes fixed on me instantly. I swear it recognized me, as if it had been waiting all this time, expecting me to come. I stumbled backward, hitting a stone pillar, my flashlight clattering to the floor. The beam swept across the crypt, and I caught glimpses of more shadows, more coffins shifting, more lids lifting ever so slightly. The pulse of light from within them grew erratic, like a heartbeat out of sync. I turned to flee, but the door wasn't just closed, it was gone. The wall had become a solid slab of stone, the wrought iron gone as though it had never existed. I pounded on it, screaming, my voice echoing like a hollow wind, but nothing changed. The whispers began then, soft and low, almost under my breath. Names, hundreds of them. Every voice sounded familiar and strange, calling to me, promising, warning. I recognized one, my own. My name, whispered in a tone I had never heard, but that made my skin crawl with recognition. And then came the laughter, dry, brittle, like twigs snapping underfoot. It wasn't outside, it was inside me, in my chest, in the floor beneath my feet. I backed into a corner, pressing against the cold stone, and noticed a faint pattern on the floor. Symbols like the ones on the coffin lids etched into the stone, glowing faintly with that same yellow light. They pulsed with a rhythm that made my heart ache. I don't know why I did it, I can't explain it, but I knelt down and touched them. The instant my fingers made contact, the light surged, filling the crypt, and the shadows shifted violently. I screamed, pulling back, but the force pressed me to the floor. Faces, hundreds of them, pressed against the walls and coffins, pale and warped, their mouths opening in silent screams. Some reached out with hands too thin, too long, nails curving like claws, and I could feel them brushing my skin. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only watch as the coffin I had first seen fully opened, and the thing inside crawled upward. Not walking, but sliding in a way that seemed wrong, limbs bending at impossible angles, tilting, twisting. Its eyes were fixed on me, and I knew it wasn't the only one. Every coffin seemed to stir, and the crypt vibrated with a low hum, a chorus of whispering voices that filled my head until I could hear nothing else. And then it stopped. Everything froze. Silence. Stillness. The weight on my chest lifted, but the air remained cold, dead, oppressive. I dared to look up. The coffin lids were closed again. The shadows had returned to normal, or as normal as they could be in a place like this. My flashlight had fallen to the floor, still flickering. I grabbed it and stumbled toward the wall where the door had been. I pressed my hand against the stone, willing it to move, willing it to be there. And it was, slowly, impossibly, the door reappeared. It swung open just a crack, letting in the fog and the faint smell of autumn leaves outside. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I didn't look back until I reached the outer gate. The cemetery was empty, quiet, the fog curling lazily among the headstones. I didn't stop running until the town lights were visible miles away. I never went back. I couldn't, but I know what I saw. I know what touched me. I know what waits. I tried to tell someone, anyone. Friends laughed it off, said it was an overactive imagination, said I had been alone too long in the dark. But I can't forget. I can't sleep properly. Sometimes, when the wind rustles through my room at night, I swear I can hear the faintest scrape of a coffin lid, or a whisper calling my name from far away. I have dreams of that crypt, and in those dreams, it opens for me again, slow and deliberate, and I feel the pull of that light, that pulse, that presence. And I know deep down that it isn't finished with me, that whatever was inside that crypt, whatever woke when I looked at it, will be waiting. Always. Even now, I avoid cemeteries. Even now, I don't take shortcuts. Even now, I hear my name whispered in the wind sometimes, and I can't shake the certainty that one day I will return. That crypt is patient. The things inside it are patient. And I am not. I will never be free. I had never believed in the kind of things you read online. The ghost stories, the warnings about wandering cemeteries at night. But that night changed everything. I was working a part-time job at a small-town newspaper, mostly doing photography and odd assignments, when I got a tip about an abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of the county. People claimed they'd seen strange things there. Disturbed graves, late-night figures wandering among the headstones, even animal carcasses laid out like offerings. I figured it would make for a sensational photo story. Nothing more. I got there around dusk, the sky bruised purple and gray, the wind cold enough to make the hair on my arms stick straight up. The cemetery was smaller than I expected, a clearing in the middle of thick woods, surrounded by trees that creaked and groaned like they were alive. The iron gate was half rusted, swinging slightly in the wind, making a soft metallic squeal. I walked in slowly, camera swinging from my neck, scanning for anything interesting. Most of the graves were old, the headstones cracked and leaning, the names barely readable. Some were covered in moss, others sunk into the earth like the ground was swallowing them. I had been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I noticed something new, a fresh mound of earth in the back corner. I froze, fresh, not old and crumbling like the others. The soil was loose, dark, damp. There were no flowers, no markers, nothing to indicate who it was for. I crouched closer, careful not to step too close, and that's when I saw them. Footprints leading away from the grave. Bare footprints, small, narrow, pressed deep into the mud as if whoever had walked there was careful not to slip. They went straight into the woods and disappeared into the shadows. My stomach turned over. I shouldn't have been surprised. I knew someone had been here recently, digging, burying, but I hadn't expected to feel watched. I glanced around quickly, the trees shifting in the dim light, and the wind seemed to whisper through the branches. I should have left. I really should have. But curiosity got the better of me. I followed the footprints, my boots sinking into the mud, the air thick and smelling faintly of damp leaves and something else, something coppery, like blood. My camera clicked quietly, each snap echoing in the stillness, making me jump at every little sound. The footprints led me deeper into the trees, past the cemetery fence where the ground sloped downward into a shallow ravine. I stopped at the bottom, crouching behind a fallen log, trying to catch my breath without making noise. The prints ended here. Whoever had made them had vanished, or at least they weren't anywhere I could see. I scanned the area, my eyes adjusting to the faint moonlight, and I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the ravine, half hidden by trees, motionless, just watching. My heart thumped like a jackhammer. The figure didn't move when I froze, didn't turn, or even seem aware of the wind brushing its clothes. I swallowed hard and whispered to myself that I was imagining it. My brain tried to rationalize, maybe a hunter, someone camping, but there was something off. The posture, the stillness, the way it seemed to follow me with its eyes even when I moved slightly. I couldn't shake it. I backed away slowly, trying to stay quiet, but the underbrush cracked under my boots. The figure shifted slightly and I realized it was moving toward the grave. Panic surged and I ran. My legs burned as I stumbled back toward the cemetery, the shadows stretching long and dark in front of me. When I reached the grave, my stomach dropped. The mound was no longer intact. The soil had been disturbed, scattered, dug up and flung to the side. The footprints were gone. Whoever had been there had returned, or maybe never left. I spent the next hour circling the cemetery, flashlight in hand, trying to find any sign of the figure or the footprints. The woods were silent, unnaturally so, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. I kept imagining movement in the corner of my eye, shadows darting between headstones. My hands shook. Every little sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, the soft thud of something falling in the distance made my heart lurch. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd lost my nerve and that it was time to leave. I turned to walk back to the gate, and that's when I saw them again. More footprints, leading directly to me, appearing out of nowhere in the dirt behind a leaning headstone. They were smaller than mine, but they weren't human-shaped exactly. They were too narrow, the toes too long, almost claw-like. They ended a few feet from where I stood. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. Then I heard a whisper. Not a word, not even a name, just a soft hissing that made the hair on my neck stand straight. I spun, flashlight trembling in my hand, but nothing was there. My rational mind screamed at me, wind, trees, animals. But the fear curling in my chest told me otherwise. I decided to take one last photograph of the grave before leaving, to prove to myself that I was right to come. I lifted the camera, the flash illuminating the mound in harsh white, and froze. In the light, I saw the outline of a hand pressed into the dirt, pale, narrow, almost skeletal, as if someone or something was crawling out of the ground. I stumbled back, dropping the camera. It hit the earth and clicked again, capturing a blur of darkness. I ran then, not walking, not cautiously stepping, but full-on sprinting toward the gate. My lungs burned, the branches tore at my jacket, the mud sucking at my boots. I didn't look back. The wind carried a sound, faint but unmistakable, like shuffling feet and soft breathing following me through the trees. When I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the doors. I slammed inside, started the engine, and drove without headlights until the road widened into the main street. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old floorboards in my apartment sounded like footsteps circling me. Every shadow cast by the streetlight through my window looked like the narrow shape of those prints. My camera was sitting on the floor by the bed, the memory card missing, the lens cracked. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Over the next few days, I called the local authorities, told them what I saw, showed them the pictures on my phone. They said the cemetery had been abandoned for decades. No one had reported anything, no recent burials, no signs of trespass. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination. Stress, exhaustion, the thrill of a story gone too far. But deep down, I knew better. A week later, I went back to check something. Not to investigate, just to see if I was crazy. The cemetery was empty, the grave untouched, no footprints in the mud. I felt relief at first, but it was fleeting. When I walked toward the exit, I noticed the mud at the edge of the clearing. More footprints, leading straight toward my car. My blood ran cold. I didn't wait. I drove straight home, locked the doors, and didn't leave my apartment for 3 days. Since then, I've been careful. I avoid cemeteries, forests, any quiet place where someone or something could be watching. But I know it's still there. Sometimes at night, when the street is quiet, I hear soft shuffling, faint scraping along the pavement. My windows show shadows stretching in ways they shouldn't. I've taken photos, videos, nothing ever appears on them. But I feel it. Always. The way it watches, waits, knows where I am. I've thought about going back to the cemetery, to confront it, to understand what I saw. But I can't. The thought of those claw-like footprints, the mound of earth disturbed, the skeletal hand pressed into the soil, it's enough to keep me away. I can feel the weight of it in my chest every time I close my eyes. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear someone whisper my name, soft and low, from somewhere just beyond my apartment walls. I know it isn't real. I want to tell myself that. But when I roll over, I see faint impressions on the carpet. Tiny narrow footprints pressed deep into the fibers, leading straight toward my bed. And I know that one day, if I'm not careful, they'll find me again, because those footprints don't just vanish. They wait. I was never one to scare easily, but the night I spent in that cemetery changed everything. I didn't plan to stay that late, didn't plan to be alone, and I certainly didn't plan to hear what I heard. I had driven out to a small, forgotten cemetery in the outskirts of my town, the kind of place you pass by and barely notice. The kind where the grass grows wild, gravestones tilt at odd angles, and the air smells like damp earth and decay. I had always been curious about old cemeteries. There's something peaceful about them in daylight. But that night, under a full moon, it felt different. Wrong. I parked my car along the narrow dirt path that led into the cemetery and grabbed my flashlight. The beam barely cut through the fog that had rolled in from the valley below, leaving everything else in a gray, wavering blur. I walked slowly, careful not to trip on roots or cracked stones, my boots sinking into soft earth. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and something else I couldn't place. Rotten? Metallic? I shook it off and told myself it was just the smell of old graves, nothing more. The first few gravestones I passed were unremarkable, the names and dates fading with time. But as I moved further in, the cemetery seemed to stretch unnaturally, the trees leaning closer, casting jagged shadows that flickered in my flashlight. The silence was heavy, thick, and it pressed against my ears in a way that made me feel like I wasn't alone. Every now and then, I thought I heard something behind me, a rustle, a creak, the soft crunch of leaves, but when I spun around, nothing was there. I finally reached a small clearing at the center, where the oldest graves sat in a neat semicircle. Some were cracked, some broken completely, their inscriptions barely legible. I crouched to examine one, a family plot from the 1800s, and that's when I heard it. A voice, soft, deliberate, almost casual, but not distant. Close, right behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. My heart leapt into my throat, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I spun around, expecting maybe a prankster or someone camping nearby, but there was no one. Just fog and shadows and the cold bite of night air. "Hello?" I whispered, my own voice sounding small and weak. No answer. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining things, that the wind had carried some strange noise, and bent down again to look at the stone. Then I felt it. A presence. Like someone standing so close I could feel their warmth, even through the chill. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I turned slowly, flashlight scanning the fog, the trees, the gravestones, and saw a man. He was tall, pale, and wore an old coat that looked out of place, like it belonged in another century. His face was obscured by shadow, but I could see his eyes glint in the dim light. He didn't move toward me. He didn't speak. He just stood watching. I said, his voice was low now, deliberate, almost a hiss. "The dead don't stay buried here. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. My rational mind tried to insist he was crazy, that this was some homeless man or local playing a prank, but every instinct screamed at me to run. I wanted to turn and sprint back to my car, but my legs refused. It was like the earth itself had rooted me in place. "Why, what do you mean?" I finally managed to say. My voice sounded hollow in the fog. He didn't answer immediately. He just tilted his head, studying me, and then pointed toward the oldest graves in the clearing. "Look, watch." I shone my flashlight toward the stones, and at first I saw nothing. But then I saw movement, subtle, almost imperceptible. The ground seemed to shift, as if something underneath was trying to push its way out. Dirt cracked along the edges of a few graves, small stones rolling aside. I blinked, thinking it was my imagination, but the movement continued. A hand, pale and thin, burst through the earth in a trembling claw. And then another. I stumbled backward, heart racing, and he moved closer, not threatening, not hostile, just closer. "They can't rest," he said softly. "Not here." "They never do." The sight of the hands breaking through the soil was enough to make me gag. They weren't big, not grotesquely deformed, just thin and ghostly pale, fingers digging into the earth as though struggling to climb out. Then more hands. A whole grave erupted, a body following, pale and wet with soil. I couldn't scream. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I just stood there, frozen, flashlight shaking, watching the dead rise. The man didn't move. He just watched me, his eyes cold and unblinking. "You're lucky I'm here," he said. "Most people end up joining them." I stumbled backward another step, falling into a gravestone, scraping my elbow. I gritted my teeth against the pain, trying to pull myself together. I could hear the groaning, the low, wet sounds of bodies struggling, reaching, clawing. The smell hit me then, the stench of wet earth, decay, and something far more rancid. I gagged, covering my mouth with my hand, and the man sighed. "You have to leave," he said, "before they notice you." I didn't hesitate. I spun around and ran, branches whipping my face, roots snagging my feet. Behind me, I could hear it, the soft, wet thuds of bodies emerging from the ground, following, though I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I ran until the clearing was behind me, until the fog thinned, until the lights of the road appeared ahead. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, door slammed, locked, hands trembling as I started the engine. I didn't know what to think. Part of me tried to rationalize it. Hallucination, fatigue, some kind of stress-induced delusion. But the dirt under my nails, the scrape on my elbow, the lingering smell of earth and decay clinging to my clothes told me it was real. I didn't sleep for days, haunted by images of those pale hands clawing out of the soil, the whisper of the stranger's voice warning me. I tried to find out more about the cemetery, but records were scarce. Locals avoided it, speaking in hushed tones when I asked questions. They told me it was old, abandoned, a place where things happen, but no one would say what. The stranger I saw? Gone. I drove there multiple times afterward, hoping to find him, to ask him questions, to understand, but he never appeared again. Months later, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I started researching folklore, old newspapers, anything that mentioned graves disturbed or bodies missing, and I kept finding the same stories, disappearances, reports of locals swearing the dead walk in that cemetery, tales passed down about a guardian who watches over the restless dead. They all said the same thing. Some graves don't hold what they should, and the dead don't always stay buried. I haven't gone back, and I doubt I ever will. The cemetery still haunts me even when I'm miles away. Sometimes at night I smell it, the wet earth, the decay, and I feel the cold press against me like that fog did. I hear whispers sometimes, low and almost casual, like someone reminding me that the dead are closer than I think. And I wonder if the stranger was trying to protect me, or if he was part of it all, a caretaker of the living who glimpses what shouldn't be seen. I've tried to tell friends, but it's hard to explain. Most think I'm exaggerating, imagining things, or letting some urban legend get to my head. But I know what I saw. I felt it. The cold touch of soil, the struggle of hands breaking free, the watching eyes in the fog. And I know somewhere in that cemetery the dead are waiting, and they remember me. I don't visit cemeteries anymore, not even in daylight. And sometimes, when I pass an old graveyard, I slow down, just to see if I can catch a movement, a whisper, a shadow that shouldn't be there. Because I know now that the dead are not quiet. They are not still. And if you linger too long, they notice. They remember. They follow. Sometimes in my dreams, I'm back there. The man appears again, tall and pale, eyes glinting in the fog. He doesn't speak. He just watches, and behind him, the hands rise from the graves, reaching, clawing, never resting. And when I wake, I can still feel their wet, cold fingers brushing against me, reminding me that the dead don't stay buried. Not there, not ever. I shouldn't have been there. I knew it the second I parked at the edge of that cemetery, the one tucked into the woods behind the old church on the outskirts of town. It was almost midnight, the air cold enough that my breath hung like mist in front of me. I didn't even want to be alone, but something, curiosity, stupidity, I don't know, drove me in. I had been hearing stories for years, locals whispering about strange noises, shadows that moved against the wind, people who vanished near the graves. I told myself it was just small-town legend. I told myself I was smarter than that. I was wrong. The gates were rusted and bent, swinging slowly even though there was no breeze. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It wasn't just damp dirt. It was heavier, metallic, almost sweet, like iron mixed with decay. I kept thinking it was just the old graves, but it clung to my clothes, my skin. Every step I took over the uneven stones echoed, though the place was silent otherwise. Then I heard it, a soft, distant chuckle. I froze, my heart jumped. It was faint, like someone laughing far away, but it carried through the night with an unnatural clarity. I told myself it was the wind or an animal, but it wasn't. It was deliberate, and it was human. I tried to convince myself to turn back, but my feet moved forward anyway. Each grave I passed had names I didn't recognize, dates long gone, and some were so old the letters were almost rubbed away entirely. The laugh came again, closer this time. I swear I could pinpoint it from behind a cluster of trees at the far end of the cemetery, but when I looked, nothing was there. Just shadows shifting as the moonlight fought through the clouds. My chest tightened. Something about the laughter felt wrong. It wasn't cheerful. It was teasing, knowing, like it was aware of me, testing me. I wandered past a row of graves marked by small cracked stones. The air grew colder, biting through my jacket. My phone had no signal, of course, and I felt utterly exposed. That laugh came again, now from multiple directions at once, echoing off the gravestones. My eyes darted around, trying to catch the source, and that's when I saw movement, shadows sliding along the ground, separate from the trees, twisting unnaturally. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it didn't go away. They weren't animals. They weren't people. They were something else, somewhere between solid and smoke. And they seemed to circle me. I tried to run, but the ground was uneven, roots catching my shoes, and the closer I moved to the gates, the further away they seemed. The laughter didn't chase me. It stayed behind, mocking, distant, yet I felt its weight pressing into my chest. I stumbled toward a grave with a large stone cross and pressed my back against it, shaking, listening. The laughing stopped suddenly, replaced by a whisper. My name. I froze. There was no one near me. No one had seen me, yet that voice knew my name. And it wasn't just one whisper, it was hundreds, overlapping, echoing in a way that made my ears ring. I tried talking to it, saying that I wasn't afraid, but my voice sounded small, like it wasn't mine. Then I noticed something I'll never forget. The graves around me were different now. Names I didn't recognize had appeared overnight, fresh. Dates were current, some even tomorrow. I reached out to touch one of the stones. The letters were wet, as if freshly carved, and underneath, I swear I could feel warmth, like a pulse. My skin crawled. I could hear breathing now, soft and ragged, moving between the stones. I wanted to believe it was someone hiding, a prankster, but the air was too still for a person to be moving like that. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, coming closer but not touching the ground, almost like the stones themselves were moving. I spun around, no one, just the graveyard stretching endlessly, dark and cold. The laughter returned, softer, intimate, circling me. My mind screamed to run, but my body was frozen. Every instinct in me was shouting, "Leave," but I couldn't. It had me. The shadows twisted toward me, and I could feel their heat now, not cold but alive, pressing in like they wanted me to notice them, wanted me to be afraid. I fell to my knees and started crawling, desperate for the gate, for any path out. The whispering grew louder, the laughter more structured, like it was orchestrating my terror. I passed a row of graves with small statues, angels with broken wings, faces chipped off by time. One of the statues had my face. I swear it wasn't an illusion. I touched it, cold stone under my fingertips, but it wasn't cold anymore. It felt like skin, warm and beating, and the laugh rose to a pitch that made my teeth ache. I screamed and pulled back. The moment my hands left, it turned back into stone. I ran. I don't know how far, dodging roots, leaning over cracked headstones, slipping in mud. Every time I thought I could see the gates, the trees shifted. The paths curved differently, the cemetery rearranging itself. The laughter followed, now not behind me but above me, around me, echoing from every direction. My lungs burned, my legs were bruised and bleeding, but I couldn't stop. At some point I stumbled onto a small mausoleum at the far edge of the cemetery. The door was slightly ajar. I didn't want to go in, but I had nowhere else to go. Inside it was pitch black, but I could feel eyes on me. I fumbled for my phone light, but it flickered and died. The air smelled of decay and something else, something sweet and coppery. The whispers were louder here, more focused, as if waiting. I pressed against the wall, wishing I could disappear, and that's when I felt it. A hand. Cold, wet, and impossibly thin, brushing against my shoulder. I screamed and spun. No one. The mausoleum was empty. The diary wasn't here, obviously, but I felt like it didn't matter. The cemetery itself was alive, and it remembered every name it had ever known. I tried to climb out through a small window, but it was like the stone had grown around me. The laughter became a chorus now, chanting, circling, filling the mausoleum until it was impossible to think. I could hear names, all of them mine, different variations, full name, nicknames, half-formed whispers. The cemetery was calling me, claiming me. I don't know how long I stayed in there. Hours, days, maybe only minutes. Time became meaningless. I could hear movement outside, footsteps, voices, but I couldn't reach them. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Every attempt to escape was met with laughter, with whispers, with the pressing weight of invisible hands pushing me back. I tried closing my eyes, covering my ears, chanting nonsense to myself, anything to drown it out. It was useless. Finally, I collapsed, exhausted, against the wall of the mausoleum. The laughter slowed, softened, and the whispers changed tone. They were no longer teasing, but patient, expectant. I could feel them wrapping around me, inside me, pulling me down into the earth itself. I don't know if I passed out or if I was just swallowed into the cemetery. When I woke, I was outside, standing at the edge of the woods, the gates back where they should have been. My clothes were torn, mud caked on my shoes, but there was no sign that I had been inside the cemetery at all. No footprints, no blood, nothing. But I could still hear it sometimes at night when the wind blows just right through my window. A faint laugh echoing far away, almost playful, but unmistakably human. And sometimes in the dead of night, I swear I hear my name whispered back at me. Soft, patient, inviting. I've never gone back, and I don't think I will, but I know it's waiting. I know it remembers me. And every time I pass a cemetery now, even in daylight, I feel it, watching, laughing just beyond my sight, counting, waiting. I've tried telling people, friends, family, even the police once. No one believes me. They all smile, nod, tell me it's just my imagination. Maybe it is. Maybe I imagined it all. But some nights when I can't sleep, I drive past the cemetery and I hear that faint echo of laughter again, soft but unmistakable, and I can't help but think it's still calling me back. Still learning my name, still waiting for me to come closer. I realized something was wrong the moment I stepped into the cemetery. I'd gone there on a dare, a challenge from friends who thought it would be funny to see me freak out in the old graveyard just outside town. It was late October, and the sun had just begun to dip behind the trees, leaving the rows of headstones in long, thin shadows that stretched across the ground like skeletal fingers. The air smelled damp, earthy, and faintly metallic, and the wind whispered through the bare branches in a way that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I told myself it was just nerves, that cemeteries were creepy by nature. But even as I said it aloud, my stomach tightened with a cold, crawling dread. I followed the main path at first, the crunch of dead leaves underfoot the only sound besides the occasional call of a crow. The gravestones were old, many leaning at odd angles. The inscriptions faded or cracked. Some were simple, just names and dates. Others had small statues of angels, their faces worn away by years of weather. I tried to laugh at myself, trying to shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. But the sensation didn't leave. I kept thinking I could see movement at the edges of my vision, shapes shifting behind the stones, only to vanish when I turned my head. I reached a section of the cemetery that was more overgrown, where the grass was knee-high and the paths had long since disappeared. The shadows here were darker, almost tangible, pooling around the stones in strange, irregular shapes. That's when I first saw it. A figure hunched, standing perfectly still behind a headstone about 20 feet away. I froze. I could see the glint of something in its eyes, maybe reflection, maybe not. But it wasn't human, at least not entirely. I blinked and it was gone. My rational mind told me it was a trick of the light, the shadows stretching and bending. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I kept walking, faster now, my steps loud against the dry leaves. Every time I turned a corner, I felt that same presence, always just behind the headstones, keeping pace with me without moving in a normal way. I tried calling out jokingly, telling whoever it was to come out, but my voice sounded small, swallowed by the vast hollow quiet of the cemetery. No answer came, except the occasional snap of a twig that wasn't mine. The sun dipped lower and the temperature dropped quickly. A mist began to rise from the ground, curling around the headstones like fingers reaching for me. My phone's light barely cut through it, just enough to make the nearby stones glow faintly. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged, and the crunch of my boots, but the footsteps that weren't mine seemed to echo in places that made no sense. I felt like I was being circled, watched from every angle. I stopped near a particularly old section, the gravestones crumbling and covered with moss. Something about this area felt different, heavy, oppressive, almost alive. That's when I noticed the eyes, small, dark, reflective dots just peeking over the top of every headstone around me. At first I thought it was my imagination. I told myself the moonlight was catching knots in the wood, holes in the stones, anything. But then they moved, slowly, deliberately, as if tracking me. Every stone I passed had those eyes, hundreds of them, all focused. My heart thumped violently against my ribs. I turned to run back the way I came, but the path seemed different. I could swear I'd taken that corner already, but the stones didn't match what I remembered. Panic set in. I ran blindly, weaving between the graves, the air thick and cold against my face, the fog curling around my legs. Every time I thought I saw the end of the path, another headstone would appear, taller, closer, blocking the way. And behind each I felt it. That gaze, patient, waiting. I stumbled into a clearing where the oldest graves were set apart from the rest. The ground was uneven, sunken in places, and the smell of rot was strong. And then I heard it, the whispering. Low, guttural, impossible to make out clearly, like dozens of voices overlapping, all speaking at once. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, trying to make it stop. But it didn't. The voices grew louder, filling the space around me, coming from behind the stones, from under the ground, from the mist. That's when I saw it clearly. Not one figure, but many. Shadows, humanoid but distorted, slipping from one grave to the next. They didn't walk. They floated, gliding just above the earth, and their eyes followed me like torches in the dark. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My body refused to move. It was as if the cemetery had swallowed my will, leaving me trapped in the center of its domain. I turned slowly, hoping to find a path back, but there was nothing familiar. Every direction led deeper into the stones. I tried to memorize landmarks, the shapes of the few intact gravestones, but the moment I blinked, they shifted. It wasn't just my imagination. The stones themselves seemed to rearrange, closing off escape. My stomach churned with nausea and fear. I realized I was completely lost in this place, surrounded by entities that should not exist, all with their unblinking, hungry eyes fixed on me. Time became meaningless. I don't know how long I crawled, stumbled, or ran through that fog-choked graveyard. Every sound, the snapping of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the soft sighing of the wind, felt amplified, like it was coming from right behind me. Sometimes I caught glimpses of shapes moving just out of the corner of my eye, tall, thin figures that melded perfectly with the shadows of the headstones. I would spin around and they'd be gone, replaced by empty stone. And yet, I could feel them, a cold pressure pressing against the back of my neck, a weight in the air around me. Eventually, I collapsed behind a leaning stone, gasping, my hands pressed to my face. The fog had thickened, swirling with unnatural patterns, curling around the gravestones, around my legs like it wanted to pull me in. And that's when I noticed the smell. Something dead, but not from the graves themselves. Something fresh and iron-heavy, like blood. My stomach turned violently, but I couldn't move. The whispering voices returned, louder, more insistent, chanting my name in strange, broken syllables. I don't know how they knew my name. I don't know how they could have. In a moment of reckless courage, I ran again, darting between stones, hoping to find the main path, hoping to find the edge of the cemetery. The fog thinned slightly. The whispers faded to murmurs, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being funneled, herded toward some point I couldn't see. And then I saw it, a large, unmarked stone in the center of the clearing, taller than any I had seen. It pulsed with shadows that seemed alive, moving like smoke, and the eyes, hundreds of eyes peering from behind it, from above it, from all around. I don't know why I did it, but I approached. Something compelled me, a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. As I drew closer, the shadows coalesced into a form, a dark, humanoid shape, taller than a man, with limbs that bent in ways that felt wrong. It didn't move toward me aggressively, but it didn't need to. The gaze alone pinned me in place. The whispers became coherent, forming words, demands, warnings, in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. Leave, never return, it watches. I bolted. I don't know how I found the exit, but I emerged onto the road that leads out of the cemetery, breathless, soaked in sweat despite the cold. I didn't look back. I didn't stop running until my car was in sight. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove straight home, the city lights and noise a shock to my senses. I thought leaving would make it end. I thought that once I was back in my apartment, surrounded by locks and walls, it couldn't reach me. But it did. The feeling followed me. At night, I hear faint footsteps outside my window, just outside the range of streetlights, rustling of leaves that don't exist, shadows flickering across my walls. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see them, the humanoid forms, hunched behind my furniture, their eyes glinting. I can't sleep. I can't be alone. I feel it in the corners of my vision, in the subtle pressures against my skin when I sit too long in one place. I've stopped going out at night. I've stopped visiting parks, woods, even cemeteries that aren't mine. I know it follows me. I know it waits. The worst part is the anticipation. Every time I think I've lost it, every time I feel safe, there it is again, just behind every headstone in my mind, watching, waiting, patient as death itself. I haven't gone back. I won't. But sometimes, late at night, when the air is thick and silent, I swear I can hear it whispering my name from the graveyard, calling me back, telling me it's still there, waiting. And I know, no matter where I go, it always will be. Something was watching me from behind every headstone, and it hasn't stopped.